Getting attention this afternoon is South Africa. They're about to present their budget, medium-term budget. As we speak, the Minister of Finance there is ready to present that medium-term budget policy statement in the Parliament. It's supposed to happen tomorrow, Wednesday. The Free Market Foundation is calling on the government of national unity to undertake significant reforms to the country's trade policies. So I wonder why investors are asking for reform at this stage. Well, let's discuss this now with Martin van Staden. He is from the Free Market Foundation, is the head of policy there at Free Market Foundation. Joins us from Johannesburg. Hi, Martin. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
So, I mean, I'm just wondering, I looked everywhere online. I saw the presentation of budget, the medium-term budget of South Africa, calling for reforms. What's the connection?
Well, I mean, it's a very important year for South Africa because for the first time in 30 years, the governing African National Congress was brought below its absolute majority in parliament, and that led to the formation of this coalition government, the so-called Government of National Unity, which now includes many former opposition parties. And this change in the makeup of our government has created an expectation for policy reform. I mean, South Africa's economic growth has been sluggish at the very least for a few decades now, and we spend more than half of our annual budget on debt servicing and on the salaries of state employees, there's a very bad return on investment there. Service delivery in South Africa is not great by any stretch of the imagination, one of the most violent societies in the world, despite spending quite a bit on police and so on. And then, of course, our state-owned enterprises, Eskom, once a leading star of electricity generation on the continent. We went through about a decade or two of rolling blackouts. And, of course, Transnet, our transport infrastructure utility, has let our railways and our ports go to waste. So there's been a lot of calls for reform. And now with the formation of this Government of National Unity, this expectation is heightened. Now, unfortunately, the first 100 days, which is when a new political arrangement tends to have its most political capital, was already over in the beginning of October since the formation of the GNU. But in our view, the medium-term budget statement is probably one of the last easy opportunities that this new government has to announce, specifically in the area of spending and of taxes and of privatization, really fiscal matters, to announce reforms. Because the expectation since the formation of the government has now been the impression has been created that actually fundamental reform is not on the agenda, because thus far we've only seen a little bit of a rocking of the boat as far as adequate implementation is concerned, rather than actual policy change, which means South Africa is still spending too much on an inefficient civil service. It is spending too much on inefficient and uneconomic state enterprises, and it is taxing the taxpayer too highly in return for very, very little. So what we as the Free Market Foundation have called upon from the Minister through our Liberty First project is for a return to fiscal responsibility. That means cutting state salaries. That means limiting the size of the national cabinet. And for tax reform, that means lowering specifically income tax to provide some relief to the very beleaguered taxpayer, and also to reduce complexity in our tax system. And then some would say perhaps most contentiously, but we've also called for a very sincere push for privatization, not only of these inefficient state assets, but also and perhaps primarily of state functions, so that state and private companies can compete on the same terms.
All right, Martin. Martin, let me just throw this in, because we're like out of time. Briefly, could you tell us what's your strategy, to engage the policymakers? Because I know you do not expect that this will be without opposition and everybody would just be won over to your side.
No, of course. No, the trade unions, specifically in South Africa, will be very reluctant to see a policy program like this implemented. But that's nothing new. So there has been a lot of pushback against these ideas for a long time. Just at the end of apartheid in the 1990s, many of these policies were in fact implemented, and that led to about 5% economic growth, a reduction in unemployment, but we've moved away from sensible, fiscally prudent policy since then because of the hold that trade unions and other stakeholders or vested interests have on the government. And now this change in government that occurred earlier this year is now a fresh new opportunity potentially for real policy reform. And we see the medium-term budget as a great opportunity for specifically that announcement to be made before everything just becomes business as usual again.
All right, Martin, we certainly wish you the best in your pursuit of those reforms. Hope to see it come to pass. Thank you so much for your time and your views this afternoon. Martin van Staden, the head of policy at Free Market Foundation in South Africa.
Thank you.